Ambassador Dr. Clarence Henry.
I thank you, Apostle, and I'm indeed delighted that all delegates, all faith-based representatives have decided to join us in what is, as Apostle Stephen Andrew has just mentioned, and during the course of the opening ceremony, mention was made of this historic event. It is indeed historic. And by virtue of you being here, you are making it historic. And you are a participant in this move of God. I think that, Apostle, we can move to the adoption of the agenda.
Sure. We want to move to the adoption of the agenda as is in your conference document. You would have noticed, for those of us who have the agenda, the conference document, there are at least 1, 2, 3, 4 agendas here. We want to move for the adoption of the agenda. So moved.
So we take it that the agenda is adopted. Thank you for your cooperation.
As it relates to procedural matters, we would break for lunch just about 12:30, and we will have 1 hour lunch, and then we resume the conference around 1:30.
With respect to agenda item 3, during the course of yesterday's church service, and again this morning during our opening ceremony, we have gone into great detail about the background and the whole genesis of this particular conference. And so we believe that we can dispense with that and move directly into agenda item 4.
Definitely. So agreed, the conference agrees to this, so we can move on speedily with the items that we have to deal with. So we would immediately look at the change process in CARICOM. Ms. Melba Phillip, our presenter, will make a presentation at this time.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I know we are pressed on time, so I'm going to try to do this in as short a time as possible. I'm going to be looking at the background to the change process, what we have done so far in the change process, and the way forward. While doing that, I'd also like to stop for a moment and look at some achievement of the CARICOM during the last 40 years. As was mentioned earlier on this morning, CARICOM turned 40 last year. And the age of 40 is the time when you stop and reflect. You look at what you have done, look at what you're doing, and then you look ahead to see how best you could live the rest of your life and live it productively. During the last couple of years, there have been a lot of criticism coming from all sides about CARICOM is not doing anything, CARICOM is not moving forward, CARICOM is, we had it from all areas. And as a result of the cry from the general public, a decision was taken that change is needed. And so, at intersessional meeting held in 2012, a decision was taken to look at changing CARICOM. Two-step process was actually identified. The first was a 5-year strategic plan, 2015 to 2019. And coming out of this 5-year strategic plan would be enough or sufficient information to give direction, a new direction to the Secretariat. So the second aspect, in addition to the strategic plan, would be renewed, respirited Secretariat. The decision, as I mentioned earlier, was taken in 2012, and that decision, heads mandated that a strategic plan be developed. And that strategic plan should focus on a narrow range of specified outcomes within specified time frame, focusing on a few practical and achievable goals. To develop the strategic plan, four-step process. Number one, a vision. Number two, to identify priorities to get us to this narrow range of things that we need to focus on. And this narrow range of things, we have to look at the implementability. Are they implementable? One of the criticisms of CARICOM is not implementing. Decisions are taken and things are not being implemented. So the decision, or the mandate was basically whatever priorities you identify, make sure that is implementable, and not only implementable, but being able to be measured. As I mentioned, I'm going to be rushing through some of the slides. These are the benefits of CARICOM, because a lot of people in our consultation during the region, we found that a lot of people are not aware of what CARICOM is doing. In fact, we heard the question, what benefit can I get from CARICOM? CARICOM is not benefiting me, and so on. And people who made those statements were not aware of the things that CARICOM had been doing in the region. So these are some of the benefits, could derive from this CARICOM, or the community: improved standard of living, full employment, expansion of trade and economic relations, organization for increased production and productivity, the achievement of greater measure of economic leverage and effectiveness of member states in dealing with third states, a group of states and entities of any description, enhanced coordination and enhanced functional cooperation. These are just some of the benefits that you could derive. Now, looking back, CARICOM have had several successes. One of perhaps the first one that come to mind is PANCAP. We heard it mentioned this morning, Pan-Caribbean Partnership Against HIV and AIDS. CARICOM, in fact, had been designated United Nations, PANCAP, have been designated a United Nations best practice in 2004. And it is believed that the Caribbean will be the first region in the world to actually eliminate mother-to-child transmission of HIV by 2015. So that's one of the achievements that we could boast of. Other achievement that we could boast of is CIFC, we know it, we're all aware of it. CVQ, that is Caribbean Vocational Qualification, which is something that we are working on as we speak right now. We have individuals in the field actually working on putting the system in place whereby individuals who have not had the opportunity to go to school but have skills, whether carpenter, whether mason, whether it's body work or whatever, they could get a certificate based on that skill, which would allow them to move freely in the region as a skilled person. We are working on that as we speak right now. Also in 2010, we had the CARICOM Youth Development Action Plan, which actually put down a program, six-step program for the development of youth as we move forward. We also have CDEMA, CCCs, CDB, the Nursing Council. These are also some of the achievement of CARICOM during the last 40 years. Now the strategic plan, in developing the strategic plan, we had to conduct consultation. We had to meet the people right across the region. And I want to tell you that over 4 months period, the consultants who were engaged to actually develop the strategic plan visited 15 member states and 2 associate member states, having over 152 meetings and meeting over 2,500 people during that period. So we had widespread consultation, that is meeting individuals in member states, also met CARICOM institutions. They also conducted an online survey. In fact, the youths conducted that survey from youths around the region, just handed it over to the youth ambassadors, and they conducted this survey. In addition to that, they had a tele-survey, and we also received written submissions from individuals right across the region as input into the strategic plan. Before we actually started the survey, though, a lot of work we know has been done already on CARICOM. I mean, we have more documents on CARICOM and the way forward than you could imagine. So for the first few months, the consultants actually focused on the work that had been done over the 10-year period. Over 25 different documents, programs were looked at, and coming out of those what they call desk work, we had a list of priorities which emerged coming out of those studies. We're just reviewing those studies. And they're listed here: agriculture, in particular food and nutrition security, crime and security, energy security, intra-regional transport, in fact that's a big one, environment and climate change, economic growth and development, youth, education, training, sports, health, ICT, and services. So these actually, were identified before the consultation started. And don't forget that the mandate from heads was to look at a few things and do it well. Here we have almost 10, and 10 in no way a few. We must bring this down to a few things. Going on the road, however, instead of getting it smaller, we expanded from 10 to 25. So these are the priorities that we got from member states, from institutions, from individuals as we move forward. Of course, high on the list is economic recovery, growth, and development. And in particular, intra-regional trade, innovation, entrepreneurship. And to actually achieve that economic growth, economic recovery, stabilization, agriculture, tourism, services, and the cultural and heritage industry actually emerge as priorities that we should actually focus on. In addition to this, we have crime and security, justice, energy security, energy competitiveness, and very, very high on the list, intra-regional trade, intra-regional transport, ANC transport. While we were in Belize they said, look, we are out of the LIAT bandwidth. We hardly see or hear about our brothers and sisters. In fact, it was mentioned that we feel like we are abandoned. We are in the wilderness by ourselves because of the poor transportation system mechanism which exists within member states. Climate change and environment also emerge as a priority which should get special attention. Labor, in particular the harmonization of labor laws, decent work, etc. also emerge as something we should focus on. And very high on the list was togetherness and identity. There are some, and I mentioned about Belize, they felt that they're outside. We're not together, we're not one. In fact, it was said during the consultation, we were more together in the 50s and 60s than we are now. In Turks and Caicos, a youth, 15 years old, say, we hate the others. Referring to Jamaicans and so on, we hit individuals from within the region. They don't feel like part of the community. So this is an area that came up as an important thing that we should actually work on in developing, as we move forward in developing this strategic plan, that is a togetherness, a oneness, a Caribbean civilization. All right, within the region, we have Dutch, we have French, we have indigenous people. How do we pull together as one as we move forward? Other areas that came up as priority: youth, sports, education and training, ICT, that is knowledge management, information infrastructure, health and wellness and mental well-being, the elderly, gender and development, election monitoring also came up as an area that they think that special attention should be placed on, capital markets and finance and governance. So these are the broad areas that actually emerge as we move through all 17 states, trying to find out what member states, what individuals, what stakeholders believe the priorities should be as we move forward. When we looked at all these priorities, we pull it together and bring it back again to 12. Most frequently mentioned that we think is very important: transportation and ANC, agriculture, food and nutrition security, agritourism, energy security, capital market and finance, relationship building, identity, togetherness, a oneness, cultural and creative industry as a lead in the service sector, youth development, health, wellness and mental well-being, including medical tourism, crime and security, environment and climate change, education and ICT. So these were the emerging priorities as we move through member states. So we started with 10, we moved to 25, and then we moved back down to 12. We're still far from being a few things. Now, in addition to the emerging priorities, we have what we call, what came out of the consultation, a list of enabling priorities. That is, in order for the emerging priorities to actually be successful, if we try to implement them, these enabling priorities must be put in place. And first on the list, of course, was supportive governance arrangement. And on the supportive governance arrangement, we heard a loud cry, we need a place at the table. We need to be involved in the decision making. That came from the civil society organization, it came from faith-based institutions, it came from the private sector, it came from the youths, it came from individuals who felt that decisions were taken and they're not part of the decision making process. So inclusive, we call that participatory governance, the need to participate in the decision making process. In addition, the decisions that are taken should be implementable. Accountability and compliance enforcement mechanism, they felt, should also be put in place to ensure that member states, after they take a decision, that they actually go home and implement it. And that again would deal with what again came out of the consultation, decision-making deficit. And when I said the decision-making, we were talking about implementation-making deficit, but out of the consultation we heard that new term, the decision-making deficit, where our heads of government would sit down and actually make a decision before doing consultation on base at home. And they would have the task now of trying to get the technical staff to implement decisions that they were not part of in the first place. So accountability measures must be put in place, and compliance enforcement measures that comes in the supportive governance arrangement. In addition to that, we felt that communication, consistent, strong, effective communication, that came out very strongly. Harmonization of legislation, that's business laws, statistics, standards, procedures, etc. If we really moving forward as an integrated unit, we need to harmonize these things, standards, laws, statistics. Free movement of person and skills. Individuals said we could move freer 10, 15, 20 years ago. Nowadays it's difficult to move. This came up as an area for us to actually achieve the objective of economic development and growth. Free movement of person, free movement of skills must be realized. We know that the CSME was established basically for that. So the cry therefore is implement the CSME as quick as possible. Human resource capacity development, not only at the Secretariat, but also within member states and institutions, within the civil society organization. There was a cry also from member states for a living presence. They felt that CARICOM is at a distance. We need to see and feel and touch CARICOM on a daily basis. So there was this cry for a living presence in member states as an enabling priority in moving forward. And very important was a sustained financing mechanism. Presently, more than 60% of CARICOM funding comes from donor agencies. This is not sustainable. It is felt that for us to move forward, we need to develop a mechanism internally to finance ourselves. I'm not too sure how that's going to happen, but that came out of the consultation that we had so far. In addition to the enabling priorities, we had a set of principles which emerged. And the first principle is participatory democracy, which I explained earlier on, where state actors, non-state actors felt that we all need a seat at the table. A second principle which emerged out of the consultation was transparency, openness, accountability. We had equity, that mutuality and reciprocity, choice, supranationality, a one voice, synergism, impact assessment, proportionality, differentiation, harmonization, and again, the living presence, the reach. And the one in differentiation, that came out more from Haiti and Belize, where it was said, look, we are all different. Haiti said, look, we speak French. And this is the largest, we are 10 million. And more French is spoken within the region than English, but still, all documents are in English. We need to recognize the difference that exists and take that into consideration. So these are some of the principles that actually emerge out of the consultation. And in addition, we had a list of requirements for us to actually move forward, we have implementation requirements, and there's a long list. Just want to mention a few. One, we should move forward on a business-like basis. In other words, we need to have plans and follow our plans. Secondly, research. I just felt that enough research has not been done within the region, and that's one of the things that actually came out. A very important one that I think for us to move forward that we need to consider is communicate, and that came out very strongly. Now, possible areas for FBO intervention, we're looking at controlling crime, education and human and social development. We look at youth development, unity, Caribbean oneness and regional integration, and public education. So these are some possible areas where, FBO, that is faith-based organization, could actually make a contribution or contribute towards this strategic plan. I should mention that, work is now in process as far as the development of the strategic plan is concerned, but information is still being collected to feed into that plan. So your deliberation here today could provide some real support as we move forward in developing the strategic plan. Thank you.
The Prime Minister, on the 9th of January, made a representation to the meeting of change drivers, as is mentioned in the document in your folder. And Apostle Andrew was present. And it was symbolic in the sense that for the number of years that I have been attending organs of the community, the different meetings, there would be the agenda, appointment of a chairman, and we proceed without any reverence or acknowledgement of the presence of the Almighty in whatever form. And we felt that the time has come, since the region is so challenged, that the time has come for something different, to involve faith-based organizations to help to address these challenges. And so it was that intervention by the Prime Minister and the prayers of Apostle Andrew on the 9th of January, which set into motion this conference. And we in Antigua worked assiduously, pressed the Secretariat on this matter, because we believe that no longer can the Secretariat undertake work without the involvement of such organizations. And it's more than that. It's also the private sector. Consultation is key. Women, youth must form the basis of consultation to feed into the work or any document being submitted to the heads for their consideration. As we say, all ideas, all views must contend, because we live in a region of many scholars. Some people may not be as educated, but they have something to contribute, because we live in a world of people, and there's difference, and difference must bring forth something that can build, and build fundamental blocks that can guide us to where we want to go. So this change process, and it's called Change Process in CARICOM, must bring newness and freshness, and that is what we have been articulating from Antigua and Barbuda every time we engage the Secretariat. The Secretariat must think outside of the box, not be hemmed in by the confines of a wall in a room. We talked about 40 years, but we need to get out of that room and see what is on the outside. you know, freshness, newness, engaging organizations like Faith Base, which is what will set a new agenda of change in the Caribbean. So I open the floor. I open the floor for your contribution on what you heard.
Please identify yourself.
I am Reverend Errol Bartholomew, from pastor of my father's house ministries, and also I serve as the general administrator of the Pentecostal Assemblies of the West Indies. We function in some 17 different islands across the region. And our population right now in the churches are anywhere around 40,000 people. I note in the presentation that was made a while ago, that we talk of the consultation and the process by which the strategic plan was arrived at. I have a couple questions. In fact, 3 points I noted that I'd like to raise this morning. I noted that there was no mention of the church being consulted in the development of the strategic plan, even though it was said that there was wide consultation. So that is one of my concerns. Where was the church, or where was the process of consulting with the church in terms of bringing this plan into being? The church being a very vital organism, and I wouldn't say organization, a vital organism in the development of human life. The other point I want to raise, and I just raise the points because it's open forum for discussion. It seemed to me, in talking about all the multitude of things that CARICOM has identified that it has to do, that CARICOM apparently is attempting to do it on its own. We have civil society groups, we have the church, we have a multitude of people who are engaged on the ground. Perhaps it might be thinking outside the box to give these groups, these civil society groups, and even the church opportunity to grab a hold of some specifics and say, allow them, give them the authority to function, but also give them the funding to make it happen, so that you have groups that are working on the ground, energizing those specific priorities that you have identified, and then be able to accomplish, probably we might be able to accomplish more, but we have people who I'm sure are waiting and anticipating that they could become involved in the kind of change process that we are looking at. And thirdly, you mentioned the limited areas of involvement of FBOs. The points that are raised there for the faith-based organizations relate strictly to deviant or areas where we have not, where the CARICOM community, the Caribbean community, has not been able to handle and to deal with effectively moral and spiritual values, and the degrading of these values and the consequence of them. And it is seen now that the church has the responsibility to function in that area, but it limits itself, or CARICOM limits the church to only function in those areas. What about the other areas of the strategic plan? Does the church have a voice in saying what is to take place in the region? Does the faith-based organizations, do we know what is taking, let me put it another way, do we see the church and faith-based organizations as important in the development of the structure of growth in the region? And these are my concerns. We are limited to address areas of crime, education, youth development, unity, and public education. And in some of those areas, we are very circumscribed in doing it. Because sometimes in schools, I remember in schools you could hardly get into schools. There are some areas in which you could hardly move to accomplish some of the things that you have in your heart to do. And I am concerned about this closed-in type of approach. I want to ask CARICOM if they would expand it to include the kind of developmental processes of people on the ground and the funding that is necessary to make it happen.
Thank you for your intervention. I must, however, challenge some of your assertions, because I do not think it is correct to say the church was not consulted. But if that was the perception, what we are doing now is a response to that. I will also suggest we try as much as possible, seeing this is an interfaith forum. We heard yesterday the importance of respect and tolerance. As much as possible, I know it's not simple, but we avoid putting any bias one way or the other regarding any faith base. The Christians refer to the church, the Muslims may refer to another, Islam may refer to something else, the Hindu, etc. So let us try the best we can to respect and acknowledge the versatility that we aim to achieve among the faith-based groups here. However, in the consultations, invitations were sent to every member state, and including to faith-based organizations, to participate in these consultations. I cannot give the details of the mechanisms within member states. CARICOM, I think it will be useful if we all leave here with a better understanding of what is CARICOM. CARICOM is not the CARICOM Secretariat. CARICOM is all of us. I want to repeat, CARICOM is not the Secretariat. It is a composition of all member states, which comprise of all the various organizations and individuals. And all of us have a responsibility for charting the development of our Caribbean community. And again, I repeat, the reason why we are happy to have you here is a recognition that maybe the message did not get well enough to a very important constituent of the community, the faith-based organization. And again, I want to acknowledge and commend Prime Minister Baldwin Spencer for probably recognizing this and working with us to make some, if you want to term it, damage control or corrective measures. Having said that, the issues there, the possible areas, so it's not exhaustive. There are possibilities. And that's why we have in this forum. We want to expand it as much as you think you can help. we are open. Our box is open. We're not just thinking in the box. We are very much welcoming to ideas, because the challenges that confront our region we have a plethora of them. And from yesterday to today, you would have heard of some of them. And whoever can contribute to help to solve these problems, and we certainly acknowledge faith-based organizations as such, and we have been engaged with faith-based organizations. In fact, the Caribbean Conference of Churches historically has been a close partner with the CARICOM Secretariat in many activities. Just recently in Guyana, there are programs with the youth, including the Muslim community in Guyana and the Hindus and Christian communities. We have a program in my directorate, Human and Social Development, addressing criminal activities among youth. So we are trying, and we are asking for new ideas. So this is the raison d'etre of this forum, to come up with additional ideas. We recognize and acknowledge the shortcomings that we may have had, but let us say that today is the beginning of a renaissance, a new day. Let us move forward. Let us not dwell too much with the imperfections of the past. Let us move forward and come out with new ideas, dynamic ideas, workable ideas. The question of financing is always going to be a challenge. The CARICOM Secretariat in itself does not possess resources there that can just be given to any groups like that. We have to mobilize to other development partners and member states. But we also expect that groups, other partners, faith-based organizations themselves can be useful in mobilizing some resources to help meet some of the challenges of the community. So I really hope that you are not seen as being asked to respond in a limited way. Of course, there are some areas that the faith-based organizations are better equipped, and I think these are the areas that were highlighted. But we look forward to other contributions, and we'll be taking note of those ideas and see how best we can work with them. Thank you very much.
The Secretariat, and indeed CARICOM, must go beyond just a mere meeting, but institutionalize the concept of engaging faith-based organizations. And of course, one of the things that we hope at the end of this conference, before we rise, is for us to have an agreement that when Antigua and Barbuda hosts the upcoming Heads of Government conference in July, that we will have another engagement, but this time with the entire heads, all the heads, even for half a day, because it is a priority. This is what we are saying. This engagement today is a priority. It is not a passing thing. When we would have left, that is the end of it. It has to be institutionalized in the modus operandi of the CARICOM Secretariat. And the way in which we went about seeking and to get the Secretariat on board, I'm saying that it has to be part of the mandate of the Secretariat from henceforth. That is what we're saying. Other questions?
Mr. Chairman, just to clarify that I meant absolutely no disrespect to anybody around the table. And we consider that this meeting is what I will call a red letter. It's a red letter day for us in the Caribbean. That something like this type of organization could be put together. And I want to, I think I missed the point earlier, but I want to congratulate and commend the Honorable Dr. Baldwin Spencer for this initiative and making something like this happen, because it has never happened in our region before. And and probably in my anxiety to get across some things that I noted were that were a little not to how I would like to see it. I missed my point in communicating this, but I want to ensure that I communicate to you that we really do appreciate this type of meeting, and we are thankful for this opportunity to contribute.
Thank you, sir. King Frankai?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Honorable ladies and gentlemen, I would just like to voice some concerns here. And one of the serious concerns that I have about this and some of the other so-called faith-based consultations that we have had in the Caribbean, of which I've been privileged to attend one, namely on the whole question of the PAN-CAP and the AIDS issue, is that when we say religion, we are very, very much often referring to denomination rather than to actual religion. And I'm glad that Mr. Slater has also tangentially touched on this particular aspect and this particular concern. I would like to suggest that we might be very much in danger of reinventing the wheel and of merely putting a little polishing on things that have been going on for some time already within our Caribbean community, within our CARICOM community even. The whole question of the Christian faiths getting together has already been established by the Caribbean Conference of Churches, and as I think that Mr. Granada has pointed out, that within CADEC, the Christian Action for Development in the Eastern Caribbean, the church, or the church, I said so now in the Christian context, has already jettisoned themselves into the whole area of development. It might have been limited, as in CADEC, to the Eastern Caribbean, but it had a much broader perspective to the entire Caribbean. We say that this consultation process has just gone on. It went on very much above the heads of many of the faith-based organizations that I think Pastor Bartholomew has just indicated. I would like to put our memories back to a consultation that happened, I can't even remember what exact date it was, but which was guided by a number of eminent Caribbean persons and chaired by Sir Sridhar Rampal, which had extensive consultations throughout the Caribbean and throughout the Caribbean diaspora in North America, Europe, and Canada. From this particular consultation, I think I might not be amiss by suggesting it's about 20 years ago, a joint consultative report was issued, which again, to my mind, has been left on the shelves to gather dust, which has yet to be dusted off. Nothing has been done towards implementation of the joint consultative report from Chairperson Mr. Sir Sridhar, Dr. Alistair McIntyre, and others. I am suggesting here, therefore, that lest we become yet another of these what have been cynically referred to as talk shops. And again, taken from what both Mr. Philip and Dr. Slater have mentioned, that the whole process is to let us understand a little more of the functioning of CARICOM and the CARICOM Secretariat. So it's not just sufficient for us to say, faith-based organizations, please make a presentation on the question of crime. But how are we to make this? Should we address our individual prime ministers? Should we go to Georgetown and address the Secretariat? And having done so, what is the process by which these recommendations are going to be taken on board? So, again, for fear of not reinventing the wheel, let us now look at the processes by which our faith-based perspectives are going to be actually implemented. So it's not so much about how is CARICOM implementing some of the things that they've been suggesting about, but how are some of our suggestions going to be implemented within the whole process of decision making at the CARICOM level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Premier Mead will respond to that.
Sorry, not just a response, but just a slight intervention. It is a misconception that at the CARICOM level, we do not commence our meetings with the intervention of the faith-based organizations. The last meeting in Trinidad, I think there was a Muslim brother, and there were at least 2 faith-based organizations who made presentations at the opening, or interventions at the opening. So I just want to correct that misconception that we do not start with some invocation. The other element is, and I think King Frankai mentioned it, how do we move forward? When there is a need for representation, do you go to CARICOM or do you go to your domestic government? Each domestic government has representation at the CARICOM level. Each domestic government has an ambassador assigned to CARICOM. And therefore, rather than seeking to go to the center at Georgetown, where they get lost in everything, your representation is at the domestic level. So therefore, your Prime Minister, who is a representative for CARICOM, should take forward the views of the faith-based organizations in Antigua and Barbuda. And then he has the right to represent you there, and it is his obligation to respond to you in terms of your concerns, which you have asked him to raise at the regional level. So I think there is a mechanism already for addressing these particular issues and these concerns.
Might I just add that this thing has come about precisely because I was of the view that there is a hiatus between what is happening, and I was trying to reconnect with the church or faith-based organizations in the region. It is not because things have not been done by various faith-based organizations in the Caribbean. I mean, talk about the CCC and CADEC and clearly others. I know a number of faith-based organizations would have been involved in a number of social work in the various communities. But it's a question now where we are in the process of putting together a strategic plan for the future of CARICOM. And it was felt that we needed to reconnect with the faith-based organizations in the region. While it is true that the process has been ongoing for some time in terms of the development of the strategic plan, I firmly was of the view that we can zero in with the faith-based organizations at this time so that at least some of their thoughts and ideas could be fully articulated and presented as an integral part of that strategic plan going forward, taking into consideration a number of the things that you yourselves are fully familiar with and you yourselves in various forms may have been grappling with in your own little way, in your own little corner. But for us now to see this in a holistic way and for us to say, well, look, these are some of the things that should become an integral part of any strategic plan. And going forward, the role of the interfaith organizations in terms of the Caribbean moving forward. And this was what was driving my thought process when this idea came about. So I think what we need to do, we can look back and look at the weaknesses, the inefficiencies, the lack of consultation before and whatnot. And we can spend the next week perhaps going through all that. But I honestly feel that we've reached a juncture now where we have to be positive, looking forward. We're gathered here. I know that there are an abundance of thoughts and ideas that you're able to share with us, and we'll be able to put that together firmly at the end of these deliberations. That will certainly inform, because the idea that I have, and that is what I had mentioned, that coming out of this session, some report will have to be presented at the next intersessional, which will be held in St. Vincent Grenadines sometime in March. I think it's March 10th to 12th. Coming out of that again, of course, there will be deliberations on that, and I would suggest, if I may, that what might be useful coming out of this thing, that at that intersessional, there should be some representation from this body to that intersessional, so that apart from my submitting a report to my colleagues, that you will have some presentation coming out of this from a representative whom you would care to choose, or delegation, whatever, so that would help to reinforce and to let it be seen that we are all very serious about this new engagement that we're trying to develop. I thought of making an intervention now just to put this thing in some kind of proper perspective in terms of how we should be going forward.
Are there any other questions? Oh, yes, sir.
If I may just make a comment at this moment. I'm Martin Callum, and I coordinate the work of the Street Passes Initiative here in Antigua and Barbuda. To pick up, I think both governments, certainly speaking of the government of Antigua and Barbuda, they're very keen, in my experience, to engage with faith-based organisations who have a plan to do work to help society. And also at the CARICOM level, in July, I was invited to speak to the working group on crime prevention, focusing on at-risk youth and vulnerable populations. And a number of faith-based groups from around the Caribbean were making presentations at that meeting. And I think that if faith-based groups have got ideas, then governments are actually responsive to them, and they need to make them known. And if they're doing actions, then governments will pick up on them. And just as an aside, Mr. Philip made the comment that people in the CARICOM region don't see the benefit of CARICOM to them. Just speaking from a European British focus, those of us who support the European Union in Britain find the same problem, that people don't see the benefits of the multinational organisations. And if someone in CARICOM can work out how to get people keen on CARICOM, they need to let the European Union know as well. Thank you.
Yes, I trust that Mr. Slater will take that back to the SG. Are there any other questions? Yes.
Just briefly to respond to my brother, one of the comments. I don't think it's really an issue of people not seeing what CARICOM does. I think the problem is they are not recognizing it as something implemented by CARICOM, because when you as we investigated more and you ask them about things, they're seeing it. They acknowledge that this is done, but they did not know. It's an awareness that it was coordinated by CARICOM, and it is important that people do, starting with us here, because you must be questioning what happened to your tax dollars that maintain the CARICOM organization. And I can assure you that Well, you saw the long list, and I'm certain that many of you here too today are now recognizing some of the activities of CARICOM and how you yourself benefit. I mean, you must have been aware of the recent CCJ ruling on Shanik Mairi. That is part of CARICOM. The Caribbean Court of Justice is a baby of CARICOM. And these are things that all of us have a responsibility to let our citizens know. And we want to ask you to do that to your congregations. Thank you.
Thank you.
We all know that we have a crisis insofar as crime and violence, gangs, you know, and so on are concerned. And there was a talk this morning about hunger and so on. Now, I am an optimist, but I'm also a realist. To understand that a number of things that are happening around us, we go about and make all sorts of statements. And listening to the presentation a while ago, and the presenter spoke to the whole idea of research. And for me, that is critical for all of us. I don't like to hear statements being made without the facts to back them up. And I am really sick and tired of even hearing politicians on radio, TV all the time, in the newspapers, all sorts of assertions. We are the facts. And for me, this is my problem, because if we don't know the real root of the problem, we won't be able to deal with them, rather than just making emotive statements. Last night, as I sat in the airport in St. Martin, I was reading on my computer of a man who beheaded his girlfriend in Jamaica in Mountain View yesterday morning. They found her head a few meters away from the rest of the body. And you'll have to wonder, why would somebody do something like this? Now, I am absolutely certain, and when I get back to my computer, I'll be reading some of the news out of Jamaica, that people would be making all sorts of statements as to why it happened. I want us, and I'm really maybe challenging or encouraging in all of our CARICOM states, the statistics departments, and wherever they do research, a lot of research needs to be done, so that we can attack the problems where they are, and not just assuming that we know exactly why certain things are happening. The work needs to be done, and whatever we can do together, we need to join forces to help, because I think it is very, very important. Thank you very much.
Yes. Good day to everybody, of course. Apostle Duncan from Trinidad. And I really want to say how much this occasion here is. Yeah, this occasion is historic and so very important for the Caribbean region. I really want to congratulate, kudos to the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda for being so bold and brave to stage this conference, because of course you know the controversies that exist within the Caribbean with regard to faith-based organizations and church and so on, as far as politics are concerned. But I have come to the conclusion from my research and from my understanding of biblical truth that the politics of any nation or region cannot be divorced from the understanding of the supreme leader or ruler of the universe. And if we have to rule any part of the real estate of God, as he claims, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. If we have to rule or govern any part of the real estate of God, we have to acknowledge him, I mean, not only in terms of that he is there, but that he must be engaged in what we do. If we go ahead trying to do it on our own, we find ourselves in very difficult situations, as we are now faced with around the world and in this region, where there are forces that are acting against our population and against our people. And we can't find what is the cause. We can't find what is the cause. We try to use symbolic and things that are really symptoms to try to find a solution. And we don't go to the root of the problem. And we will forever find ourselves in difficulties if we try to use just what we see, all right, and try to analyze and find formulae or develop formulae based on what we see, just on what we see. We have to go back to the roots. What is the cause? If we don't find out what is the cause of our situation, the young men, young women committing crime, the cause of an education system that is really not providing for the masses, the cause of a lack of proper development among our youth, the cause of the lack of unity and the oneness, the cause of the inability of CARICOM or any other organization to implement the plans that they have in train. If we don't look at the cause, we're going to find ourselves in a situation where we keep going around and around and around. And I may say that the basic underpinning of the dysfunctioning of a society has to do with the moral values of a society. The moral values of a society basically are linked to truth, are linked to that which is already established. It cannot be based on what people think. It can be based on what I subjectively bring to the floor in terms of what I believe. It has to go right back to the ultimate. We are human beings. We are dependent people. We are not independent in the sense that we can determine how long we live and where we go and that sort of thing. Whether we stay young or stay old or we keep getting old, we can't stop that. Therefore, there has to be some understanding of the ultimate reality. We have to go back to the ultimate reality in considering the faith-based organizations' involvement in these aspects that have been identified this morning. We have to get help. We have to get help from God. We have to get help from the ultimate reality, the one who brought us in the world in the first place, the one who set in motion truth and that which is right. Okay? For us to know which is wrong, we have to know which is right. And so he has set these things in train. We have to go back to the Creator. All of us will have to revisit this relationship that we should have with our Creator, get his guidance, get his direction as we go forward. Because what we wrestle against is principalities, powers, spiritual wickedness in high places, the rulers of the darkness of this world. We can't find solutions to our problems unless we work in collaboration with God.
Thank you. The microphone.
Yeah.
Thank you very much to the head table. All respect. God bless you, especially to Prime Minister Baldwin Spencer. I thank God for you, that you have been a portal that God have used to put this Interfaith Conference together. You remind me of some of the great kings in the book of Daniel. May God richly bless you. But I want to start by saying, I am Stephen Mathieu from St. Lucia. I want to thank God for that. I want to start by saying, using this statement here, the Bible teaches and history confirms that to the degree that a nation have applied the principles of the Bible in all forms of life is the degree to which that he prosper in all ways. Thank you. I'm looking at this week. I'm seeing that our nations right now, especially in the Caribbean, are spending a lot of money in the sense of preventing crimes. In St. Lucia, as a St. Lucian, we are faced with, we newly built a prison, St. Lucian called a hotel, and it was designed for about 500 inmates, but it have supersedes that by far. And according to a last French professor, he said that the way that a nation treats its prisoner would tell you its standards of morality. So I'm saying that right now, our prisons, our ghettos, our troublesome areas, we must have a way to approach this situation because our incomes are a lot. Our financial, we are spending a lot of money in trying to prevent crimes, and most of our crimes are in these areas. I'm saying the way, I'm not only saying that, but I'm also giving a solution. Because of the environment that we are in today, I believe that the church could make a valid contribution in reaching every person in the nation. I believe that God have placed every one of us in different communities in our nation. And we are responsible for our communities. I could break that law, but don't have the time to do it. Take, for instance, our schools. We have to have more interactions with our children, the young people, as the minds are soft. I believe that we should have programs where we could reach them. You understand me? I believe we should have programs where we should reach these children. And also, I believe that we should have programs where we should reach those that need to be calibrated. I believe that it's also important that a man understand a difference between being a man and being a male. They have to understand that. I believe it's also important that the men have to understand their responsibility as a man, as a father, and as a husband. They have to understand that.
Yes.
And not only that, Mr.
Yes, my
Chairman,
brother. What we will do, we will re-engage and make that contribution on the next item when we return from lunch.
Okay.
All right. Very important statements, observations you're making there. Let us agree that under this agenda item that faith-based organizations must play a pivotal role in the change process within CARICOM.
There are just a couple of things I would wish to share with you at this point. First of all, I think we have been off to a very good start, and I get a sense that something good is going to come of this this engagement into the future. I would like you to address your minds at some point to an issue which I know that members of the faith community have had some challenges with, and I know there are different views on this matter, and you may want to deliberate a little on it. And it has to do with the whole issue of the separation of church and state, and the extent of the direct involvement of pastors and ministers and so on of the gospel in the political process in any member state. As you know, a number of the constitutions in member states serve as a sort of bar. There are certain provisions that are enshrined in our constitutional document that circumscribes or curtails, if you like, the level of involvement of individual members of, for want of a better terminology, clergy, you know, just for the sake of this discussion. I think it is a matter that should occupy the attention for a brief while during these consultations. How do you see it? Is it a good thing? How do you interpret render to Caesar what is his and render to God what is his? And I don't think it just relates to tax. I mean, you know, so I think it's an area that personally I am interested in getting a sense of where you're on this, because I've been grappling with it myself over a period of time, and I would like for you to look at this matter and perhaps make some sort of pronouncement on the matter if you so feel that it is important enough so to do. The other matter that I think would be important going forward in terms of the nature of the involvement of interfaith organizations as a grouping, you may want to look at precisely how you see that happening within the context of a CARICOM framework. Yeah? And there is where the whole question of the strategic, because the strategic plan speaks to how we're going to reform, how we're going to make CARICOM more relevant, and what are some of the things that we need to do to be able to make it more relevant. And the role that the interfaith organizations could play as a grouping going forward. Should it be a recognized body of institutions that CARICOM would recognize as a, I forget the term that they call it in CARICOM, one of those agencies and you know? Yes, I mean, as part of the organs of CARICOM in terms of that. How would that fall within the prescription of institutions? But the issue that we have raised in terms of how we are going to engage civil society, and where interfaith organizations would fall in that category for the purposes of recognition. What I'm really driving at is I don't see this as just a situation where from time to time you may call upon the interfaith organizations as a grouping to say something about a particular matter. I'm going beyond that to try and cement some kind of thing inside there which says to all of us as political leaders and so on that this body are an integral part of the process, and how can we structure it in such a way that will allow for that to happen. So I want you to give some considerations to these matters, and as I said earlier, I somehow feel that this is going to be a successful engagement and we'll have a great outcome. I believe the Lord is willing it, yes, and it will happen. Thank you very much.
The role of faith-based organization, we have Major would start off, and then we ask the others to follow. You have presenter 1, 2, and 3. Follow in that order, yes, sir? Yes. Maxim. Major Maxim. Thank you.
Pleasant good afternoon to everyone. Good afternoon. And we will just move into our presentation for this afternoon. We're called upon this afternoon to discuss the numerous social problems, including fighting hunger and poverty among sections of CARICOM member states, and determine how faith-based organizations can provide concrete help to resolve these challenges. First of all, I want on behalf of the organization that I represent, the Salvation Army, as well as President of the Antigua Christian Council, which comprises 5 denominations, the Anglicans, Methodists, Moravians, Roman Catholics, and the Salvation Army, to offer my heartfelt commendation to the current chairman of CARICOM, and also to our Prime Minister here, Honorable Dr. Baldwin Spencer, for taking this bold step in calling this first CARICOM Inter-Faith Conference. To say this was long overdue is an understatement. However, it is better late than never.
Yes, sir.
You know, I always hear, be careful what you ask for. Be very careful. And if you ask it of God, once it's from a true heart and a true desire, God will grant it to you. And there are about 3 things I remember asking God for. The first one was that I said I wanted to be ABC to the general, the international leader of the Salvation Army. And in 2003 that happened for a few days. And then I said also that I wanted to address CARICOM one of these days. Want to address them. And here I've been given the opportunity this time, but they've given me the topic to talk about. I hope the second opportunity I can do it at my own free will. And then I also said that I want to fly a plane before I die. Want to fly a plane before I die. I hope that will come true. Real plane, real one. And I've been to the flying school to inquire, and they said, oh yes man, you can just pay and you can fly it. So I'm hoping that I'll take up that challenge someday to come. Our focus at this point is on the numerous social ills or problems challenging sections of CARICOM member states, which contributes to the lowering of ethical and moral standards in these states, as evidenced by increased truancy, crime and violence, gangs and gang warfare, general upsurge in deviant behavior, especially among youth, which is an indication of an emerging culture that has challenged the traditional value system and norms held in our respective communities. But more recently, the AIDS epidemic, unprecedented rise in the use of illegal hard and soft drugs by a wide cross-section of our populations. Then, attack on the family and redefinition of the makeup of the family. The proliferation of gun crime. The force on society to accept indecent language as a normal way of communication. Disrespect of elders and lack of respect for law and order. And this is just to name a few of the new social ills today society is grappling with on a daily basis. You'll agree with me that hunger and poverty are no new phenomenon. But over the last 10 years, poverty has increased to an unacceptable level, which is believed to be one of the contributing factors to the deterioration in the social fabric. I would like to share with you 2 pieces of information on poverty. And I'm going to read the first one. And it comes from the Trinidad Express. Trinidadian is here, so you can read it, confirm or deny it. Trinidad Express newspaper. And it says, it was a minister of government at the time was speaking about it. And it says, poverty in Latin America and the Caribbean is at its lowest level in 20 years. The Economic Commission on Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLA, reports that between 1990 and 2010, the poverty rate in the region dropped by 17 percentage points. That's from 48.4% to 31.4%. While the indigence rate, extreme poverty, fell by 10.3%, from 22.6% to 12.3%. The region will close this year with 174 million inhabitants living in poverty, with 73 million living in extreme poverty or indigence. In 2010, there were 177 million poor, with 70 million living in indigence. And it goes on. The next one I want to read for you, this could be contradictory, but listen to it. It speaks about there is poverty and deprivation in the Caribbean countries too. And I'm reading now, and it's done by CARICOM. Despite the impression that holiday operators to the Caribbean islands want us to believe in their brochures, poverty still persists throughout the region. Across the region, 36% of the population are classed as poor, whereas in countries like Belize, Grenada, Guyana, St. Kitts, Dominica, almost 35 to 45% of the total population is living below the poverty line. It has increased in countries that have had low or negative growth rates for protracted periods, such as Guyana, Haiti, Jamaica, Suriname, and Trinidad and Tobago. According to study, child poverty in Latin America and the Caribbean, produced by ECLA and UNICEF in 2010, almost 45% of the population under the age of 18 years is living in poverty in the region. In many of these countries, poverty has given rise to the increased school absenteeism and deteriorating literacy and numeracy rates, furthering the cycle of unemployment and increased crime. Many struggle to survive daily in conditions way beyond our comprehension. There is little or no food, or water, no electricity, or no toilets for some. Many people are still living in sweltering, overcrowded shacks. The shacks are with rusted old zincs that have plastic bags stuffed into gaping holes to keep the rain out. They are also with rotting floors and little ventilation. 45% of the population under the age of 18 years is living in poverty in the region. The question that comes to mind really is how the church, the people of this region, allowed our nations to slip into this low level of poverty and deprivation when our founding fathers, in the persons of the late Sir Grantley Adams of Barbados, Sir Norman Washington Manley of Jamaica, Sir Vere Cornwall Byrd Sr. of Antigua and Barbuda, Dr. Eric Williams of Trinidad and Tobago, President Forbes Burnham of Guyana, and Sir Robert Bradshaw of St. Kitts, Nevis and Well at the time, among others, had charted the course of economic prosperity in the West Indies Federation, which was short-lived, all because of selfishness, struggle for power, and lack of true understanding among the grouping. For if the West Indies Federation had remained, the rights and freedoms of our peoples would have been secured. Yes, freedom of movement. Yes, freedom of association. Yes, freedom of education. Yes, freedom of religion. Yes, freedom of employment. Yes, freedom to own property and business. For it was a vision of true independence and liberation. The ACC group, which I represent, including the Salvation Army, and certainly other faith-based organizations, over the years have made their contribution in development of the whole man in the following areas. Education. Some of them forget that the church has been involved long time. Let me remind you about it, for some of us have forgotten it. Education, early childhood education, primary, secondary, tertiary, even university level. The church, and homes for children. Health care, the church, to include clinics, hospitals, and homes for the elderly. The church, social welfare assistance, food hampers, food vouchers, emergency supplies in times of disaster, crisis. The church has been involved in counseling when it comes to the sick, for marriage, for death, other life crises, domestic violence, birth, you name it, dedication, divorce, separation, and the list goes on and on and on. That's the church. Life skills training, uniform bodies, youth clubs, various ages, the church. Correctional services, the church. Prison ministry, street pastors, council, you name it, the church. Nutrition, feeding program, street to the street people, the sick and shateen, and the elderly, the church. Skills training, agriculture, crafts of various types, music, vocal and instrumental, dance and drama, faith-based organizations. I need to say that. Faith-based organizations. Yes, we have in many ways laid the foundation for both moral and spiritual growth and development of our people. Yes, we could do more, but it would have to be a coordinated effort as together we tackle the seemingly endless challenges in this new millennium. Working in isolation must be a thing of the past. Permit me this afternoon to make a few recommendations. And I'm speaking to the church. CARICOM can listen. And if you want, you can include it in your agenda or even in your list of things that needs to be done. I know that the 4 things I'm going to mention will bring about some rebuttal. It may bring about some disquiet. It may bring about some people not agreeing, some disagreement, but that's okay. No problem with that. Permit me to make a few recommendations, suggestions for consideration at this conference, which could be the base for discussion in our respective groups. Agricultural cooperatives. Churches which own large plots of lands could make these vacant lands available to parishioners for agricultural production on an individual basis as well as group farming. Practical assistance with employment and food security, because that's the way we have to go today in the Caribbean. Because whoever gives us the money going to order us around and tell us what to do with it. Very important. Very important. The next one. Churches, and I know some going to squeal and say, what am I saying? But churches with surplus funds explore the possibility of setting up a revolving loans fund with interest rate at 0 to 1% repayment. This scheme would provide employment and fuel entrepreneurship, small business endeavor, the church, or the faith-based organizations. Those incarcerated always have difficulty finding employment when they're released. Isn't that so? You're listening to me?
Yes.
Yes. They have difficulty when they're released. Therefore, I want to propose the setting up of a special business venture. Special business venture, possibly, and you're going to question again and laugh and so kind of things, possibly a chain of supermarkets or the business managed and run by ex-convicts, which would be the stepping stone to full employment. It's going to take a lot to be done, I must be honest with you. A lot to be done, not as easy as I'm talking, right? This business would operate like any other normal business, with stringent rules which must be adhered to by all employees. It would provide employment for the convicts when they come out, so they move right into work and even into society. The company must be profitable within the first or 2 years, and profits roll back into business for further development and expansion. And finally, all youth and able bodies incarcerated, their sentence should include a period of skills training. I know that is going on, but it needs to be improved. A period of skills training so that when they are released, they are marketable. In closing, I want to propose a few more questions which I hope will set us thinking and eventually lead us into action. How is it that the faith-based groups stood by and ignored the so-called developments which enrich the wealthy and fuel poverty. How is it? How is it? How is it? How is it the faith-based group stood by and allowed respective governments of the region to sign up for loans with international bodies, international banking institutions, which must be paid back at higher interest rates by succeeding generations? How is it we did that? How is it we allowed that to happen? How is it? If this continues, poverty and hunger will never be gotten rid of in a hurry. Today, as one of the faith-based organizations, we are making a special call to the CARICOM leaders through this conference to seek greater collaboration with our grouping in various aspects of life for our people. I want to challenge the leaders of the various countries through CARICOM. And I want to challenge you in two things. One, the first one is work permit in CARICOM countries for pastors or missionaries in the CARICOM region I'm talking about. It's too difficult to get in some of these countries. Your own CARICOM people. The many times you have to go for a work permit and to get it. And you go from one place to the next. And you are CARICOM, born in CARICOM. And it's a problem. You need to remove all that obstacle. You need to remove all that obstacle. So take note of that for me, CARICOM leaders who are here, or the secretariat. Take note of it. We need to get rid of that. The bureaucracy, or the bureaucratic hurdles needs to be worked out so that there can be a free movement, free passage for all. What about marriage officers in the Caribbean? I've been marriage officer in about 3 different countries. Guyana, marriage officer. Barbados, marriage officer. Trinidad, marriage officer. Antigua, marriage officer. And I have to apply to every one of them. Every one of them I apply to, separately, to get the marriage license. Once you have become a marriage officer in any one of them, automatically you should be a marriage officer in CARICOM. I heard the Prime Minister spoke about whether clergy should take part in politics. The country I'm from, which I was born in Jamaica, we have no problem with that. The current Minister of Education is a Roman Catholic priest. Minister of Education, and he is Ronald Twaits, the Honorable Ronald Twaits. He's the Minister of Education. He's a priest, and he preaches, and he goes around. No problem with that. He campaigned on the platform, political platform. He did it on the radio. No problem. It's no problem with that. Why should you bar the clergy when, as I said to someone, a survey was taken and 98% of the people in this country, let's say, belong to some faith-based organization. Therefore, we could say 98% of our voters are Christians, belong to some faith-based organizations. So why should we be excluded or barred from it? Huh? That doesn't sound reasonable. No way. No way. So, we need to think of that. And then, the next one that I want to bring to your attention is the inter-regional transport. Inter-regional transport. I think they keep us apart, and so they have their own little group, protect their own turf, so that they don't get too mixed up and too involved in that. Let me tell you, travel in this region is at a high cost, too high. Too high. And when you challenge the travel agents, you know what they say to us? They say it's not us, it's the government taxes. That's what they tell us. It's not us. The fare is low, but the taxes you have to pay. Triple it. Triple it. For example, when I came to this region in 1999 really, and in 2001, which is a long time, and things in time have changed. I paid $245 to go to St. Kitts, which is just 20 minutes flight away. I can go on Fry's Hill and see St. Kitts. I could even swim if I want. And what happened? To go to St. Kitts, it's nearly $1,000 EC this day. What are you talking about? Integration? Caribbean integration? We really want to integrate? We don't want to. We still want to separate. For the divide and the rule is still there. Still want it there. No. So we need to look at the cost of travel within the region. When I first came to Antigua and Barbuda in 1970, I traveled on the Federal Maple. One ship coming up from Trinidad heading to Jamaica, the next one heading from Jamaica down to Trinidad. And it was reasonable. Reasonable. Today we have abolished that. We have gotten rid of that. And the governments want that to happen. So that the airline can prosper and they want that to happen. If you bring in back a ferry system, maybe 2 ships, running up and down, so that those who are unable to travel by air because of the cost, they should be able to travel by boat, by sea, at a reasonable cost, and feel relaxed and good about that. Take note of that too. It is important. It is important. And so, my dear people, I need to close for brevity is the game that we play. So I'm going to finish now. I'm going to finish. I'm finishing. I'm finishing. I'm finishing. I'm finishing. I'm finishing. I'm finishing. Today, as I said, as one of the faith-based organizations, we're making a special call to the CARICOM leaders through this conference to seek greater collaboration with our grouping in health, education, agriculture, skills training, child care and welfare, etc., etc., for the benefit of our people. My call is equally the same to our brothers and sisters in Christ, to come together, to pool our resources together and ideas as we seek ways and means of further assisting our people. I thank you.
I want to share a reflection on the role of FBOs in the community from the perspective of a practicing Christian. At the outset, let me say that 4 passages of Hebrew and Christian scripture will inform this reflection. And they are Amos chapter 5, verses 21 to 24, Luke chapter 4, 18 to 21, Luke 16, 19 to 31, and Matthew 25, 31 to 46. I wish to begin by invoking the concept or the doctrine of the church's preferential option for the poor. Historically, it may be situated in the context of Latin American liberation theology, and more specifically in the writing of and work of the Catholic theologian Gustavo Gutierrez, though many others have also done significant work in this area. It has gained currency among non-Catholics as well, but is not universally understood. Too often it is given the label Marxist and dismissed. To make a preferential option for the poor is to make an option for Jesus, who saw his own mission and ministry as exercising such an option. It is not without significance that Jesus' first public preaching was in a Jewish synagogue when having read from the prophet Isaiah, and I quote that passage, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovering of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." That's Luke 4. But having read from the prophet Isaiah, he embraced that mission as his very own, declaring, "Today, this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." Jewish prophets had been very scathing in their criticism of religious practices which sought to please God but neglected the poor. An example of this is found in Amos chapter 5, verses 21 to 24. I despise your religious festivals. Your assemblies are a stench to me. Even though you bring me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. Though you bring choice fellowship offerings, I will have no regard for them. Away with the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the music of your harps, but let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. Rather than noise the noise of the congregation's worship, God desired from his people justice and righteousness. The focus of Amos was in that knowledge of God which results in righteous living and just dealings with one's fellow human beings. As one biblical scholar put it, I quote, "The most splendid worship in the world, the finest liturgies with the best choirs, are totally irrelevant if the congregation has ceased to know the God whom they worship." I would conclude with him, in any supposedly Christian activity, if the knowledge of God is absent, and if righteousness and justice do not flourish, the activity may be in vain. When we study the Gospels carefully, it becomes clear that Jesus did not focus his preaching on the life hereafter, even though that was very important. Rather, it was because the life hereafter is so important that all that Jesus preached, including his first sermon, according to Luke, was in the context of judgment and the hereafter. When we exercise a preferential option for the poor, it is more than a way of demonstrating our concern about poverty and the establishment of justice, which Amos declared that God desired. It is to make an option for Jesus. The next passage that I want to reflect on is the parable we know as that of Dives and Lazarus. There, Jesus gives us the picture of two men, one rich and the other poor. It is perhaps more important to note that Lazarus is the only person given a name in any of Jesus' parables. His name means God has helped is not a personal name, on the other hand, but is simply the Latin for rich man. Lazarus was hungry, destitute, and in physical misery. The rich man, by contrast, lived in consummate luxury, unconcerned about Lazarus's condition. They both died, being destined to spend eternity in different places. The rich man was granted the privilege of seeing Lazarus in a state of blessedness. The rich man is in torment, and there is a note of unconscious arrogance in his attitude to Lazarus, for he assumes that he can have the poor man sent across to do him service. There is an implication that the rich man's unpleasant situation was due not to his riches, but to his neglect of Scripture and its teaching. I suggest that the point of this parable is that the rich man failed to exercise a preferential option for the poor, and it had dire consequences for him in the hereafter. The passage in Matthew speaks to the Christian understanding of the last judgment in the hereafter. This, however, I suggest to you, is no parable. It is a straightforward judgment scene. In it, those who inherit the kingdom of God are those who fed the hungry, gave drink to the thirsty, clothed the naked, and visited the imprisoned. I grant you there are many interpretations here, but I boldly embrace the view that the criterion of judgment becomes not mere philanthropy, but men's response to the kingdom of heaven as it is presented to them in the person of Jesus' brother. It is therefore ultimately a question of their relationship to Jesus himself. And it is ultimately a question of our relationship to Jesus himself. Guterres articulated three principles that I want to embrace. First, material poverty is never good, but an evil to be opposed. It is not simply an occasion for charity, but a degrading force that degenerates human dignity and ought to be opposed and rejected. Second, poverty is not a result of fate or laziness, but is due to structural injustices that privilege some people while marginalizing others. Third, poverty is a complex reality and is not limited to its economic dimension. To be poor is to be insignificant, and poverty means an early and unjust death. Finally, let me say something that may not gain universal acceptance in this political season in this country. But I say it not as political commentary on any current debate in the country. There is a connection, however tenuous, between poverty on the one hand and voluntary or involuntary idleness, crime, violence, gangs, and gang violence. Quite simply, I believe that Satan finds work for idle hands to do. It is incumbent upon faith-based organizations, not only those of us who call ourselves Christians, but the Muslim and Hindu and other faith groups in our Caribbean. Governments, NGOs, and the rich. We all have a responsibility to take seriously the concerns of the poor in our political, business, religious, and cultural decisions. We all have a duty to eradicate the scourges, these scourges, from Caribbean society. If we try to do so separately, then our efforts will be the weaker. If we can collaborate together, then our efforts will be the stronger. Indeed, I would want to close by saying that I know that the CCC, Caribbean Conference of Churches, does have a long tradition of working with the poor and marginalized peoples of the region. And I know it stands ready as an FBO to be further involved in this and to lend its expertise to any initiative of working with faith-based organizations to address the matter of poverty. Let us truly recognize that for us as Christians, we have to exercise a priority for the poor. And as we seek to exercise that preferential option for the poor, I am sure that it is something which also resounds with persons whose faith-based traditions are different from ours. But let us, my brothers and my sisters, do our best to work for the poor and marginalized in the Caribbean. Thank you.
I want to admit that I'm tremendously privileged to be here. I fortunately wear two sides of the hat, as a minister of the gospel as well as a minister of government. So when I hear talks about the separation between church and state, in me it's a coming together of church and state. And I feel, and personally, it's an honor for me to do that. This particular conference, as distinguished from all other conferences, has to do with the vision of the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda to gather leaders and members of faith-based organizations, and I want to state that, from around the region, so that we can in some way develop common ground seeing that all the things that face the region are common to all of us. That when there is poverty, poverty does not just hit one religious sector. When there is crime, it does not hit one religious sector. And that we must begin to now broaden the scope and broaden our operations and realize that whatever hits one will just hit all. And how we work together in strengthening our resolve and how we can come together. Though we may be different, yet not indifferent. We might be diverse, yet we are kind of dynamic society in Trinidad and Tobago and the rest of the region. And I say Trinidad and Tobago because I've been given a responsibility to deal with the religious sector, to deal with the social sector, to bring the integration movement across the sectors in Trinidad and Tobago to where it ought to be, so that what we call the civil society organizations can have a serious input and an impact as to how decisions are made with regards to where we go as a country, Trinidad and Tobago. And it's with that in mind, the government that I serve under have chosen to establish what we call a civil society board. The civil society board is a board that is accumulated out of all of our civil society sectors. From the faith-based organizations, from the business sector, from the agricultural sector, all the sectors. And this faith-based, this civil society board's intention is to sit with what is known as the Economic Development Board and be part of the policy framing and be part of the decision making as we look and we frame policies and frame the direction that we ought to be and take as a society. That was a stepping stone for us. And it was important for us to do that as we begin to forge forward, having the input of people, not just the people in governments, but the people across the sectors in Trinidad and Tobago. We today must begin to think like that. When I took office, one of the things that I attempted to do, and I'm still attempting to do, and you know it has not been an easy thing, because the church or faith-based organizations have not been easily accepted, or not easy to accept the fact that I'm both a preacher and a minister of government. As a matter of fact, we need to change the way we think. And we need to alter our concepts of how we lead and how we have inputs in the nation. Apostle Vernon Duncan yesterday clearly reiterated, and he said that it is not necessarily being in politics, well, from the standpoint of a political organization, but he did not rule out the fact that some of us may just have to be called to do that. And I believe that if you're not called to do this, then don't. Many people have asked me, why am I in politics? And then they themselves, because I have been, got all excited to also want to be in politics, and I said, you run your lane. Run your course. Do what you must do, but don't cross lanes. Ensure that you are called to do this and nothing else. By the way, I must apologize if you find me sneezing a little bit or a little groggy. It's because I'm down with the influenza. And so it's important for us to do that. But while being in office, one of the things I attempted to do is set up the mechanisms for change within the faith-based organizations. And let me tell you what we have been doing. I attempted to set up pseudo aspects of government from the faith-based organizations. So we attempted to set up a council for education out of the faith-based organizations, a council for the economics, a council for health, so that we can bring to the table alternatives. That we can sit with governments and ministers of education and ministers of health and ministers of national security, and then we can present the view from the church-based organization as opposed to any other views. We can present alternative views. We do not just have to sit and hope that one day CARICOM will call a faith-based conference. I say this for myself. As radical as I am, that I I'm offended that we had to wait on CARICOM to call us together. But I'm glad that it happened. And it says to us that we are always followers and not leaders. Sorry for my language. I'm very radical, but very passionate about this. Because for too long we've allowed the world, and I'm not saying that they are worldly people, to lead us in the directions that the world that honors us as gospel artists, is the world that gives us awards. It is the world that has been doing everything and saying, you know, you are the best singer for Christ. The world. And here it is. They're teaching us a sound lesson that we have not been able to come together, and that we needed their help to come together. But I'm glad that we took the opportunity to come together nevertheless. But out of this, we must not wait on CARICOM to call again. Out of this, we must not wait and hope that Prime Minister Spencer or any other Prime Minister says, let us get the faith-based community together. We must learn a lesson and decide from here when we will meet again, what we will do again, and where and how we're going to approach this movement forward. Unless we are integrated within ourselves and among ourselves, then we have nothing to offer anybody else. One person said to me some time ago that the world is not getting darker. It's just the light seems to be growing dimmer. And that struck me. And the impact that we need to have as a faith-based society, what we need to be teaching and telling our members, must bring about the kind of change as to how we operate as a society, and then how we influence and impact governments of the day. We as a people must tap on the potential of the region. We must, first of all, understand what we have already achieved, where we have fallen short, and how we as a faith-based community can now be part of the process to now deal with the deficiency and bring it up to where we think it ought to be. We have tremendous capacity in the faith-based organizations. We have tremendous potential among ourselves. But until we get together, country for country, then the region at large, and begin to say to ourselves that we are nations within nations, that we are people of God within the nations, then we will always be having to come from behind, and always having to answer after it's gone. But now the challenge is for all of us to step it up and decide nothing will stop us from collectively going forward. Nothing. As a society and as a region, the things that plague us are coming across the tongue. We are plagued with truancy and pregnancies, teenage pregnancies and crime and violence and all the such. I come from a land, in the last 2 months we have had an escalation in murders. Tremendous amount of. There is this sense that something has absolutely gone wrong with the heart of man. But then we likewise attempt to deal with spiritual issues in a physical way and a social way, which cannot work. That we attempt to deal with the issues that face us only from the standpoint of humanism and all of these aspects of things, when really what is facing us is a spiritual crisis. In a place that has more churches and more mosques and more temples than you can think in the region is full of it. Yet we are plagued. And it says that we've got to sit and regroup and think again as to how we have been able to approach it, and not just be sitting down complaining and blaming everybody else, but sit down and say, how can we be part of the solution that would save not only our own countries, but would save the region? Yes. And then be an example to the rest of the world. Economic and fiscal challenges are common to many of us. The cost of living has been reiterated, is rising every year. Productivity is decreasing every year. And then the question comes is that if we are in a nation and we have faith-based organizations and productivity and morality and ethics is decreasing every year, then we as faith-based organizations need to take a good look at ourselves to really see what kind of impact we have had upon the minds and the lives of people. The only way for this place to become dark is to turn the lights down. And then some of us may say that it's getting dark, and it may just be that the lights are getting dimmer. I was saying to the apostle that it's so strange that I say to my members of the church that you as a child of God cannot have somebody who is not fearful of God be honored as the best employee of your company. When you are a child of God, how can that be? You should be the best worker. We should be the best law-abiding citizens. I said to Apostle Vernon Duncan of a story that we laughed about. This Christian guy was called to a school where his son attends, and because the son was stealing the pencils and pens of the other children. And he walked into the school very, very angry and almost grappled the boy by his neck, and he says, "You are stealing pencils? And I'm bringing pencils from work every day?" So are we teaching our members not to break the law? To stop at the traffic light when nobody sees? Are we teaching our members to be the best at what they are? And not to be part of gossips, and not to be part of movelang, and not to be part of slander? Are we teaching our members all these things? Because we want the society to change, and we want the faith-based organizations to have an impact on societal challenges that face our communities. Are we stealing are we stealing while we preach don't steal? Are we paying our taxes? See, there's a lot for us to sit and talk about. There's a lot for us to begin to meditate on as we move forward, because we are all faith is the light of the world, because the fundamental basis for every religion is fear in God and respect for fellow men. Yeah. The brotherhood of man. And when somebody comes to your home with a gun, they don't ask you, "What's your religion?" They ask you, "What's your possession?" So it doesn't matter. What matters is what stance we are going to take as a faith-based society, and how we're going to move forward cohesively to bring about the internal change in the region that we ought to bring about. And somebody said, "Well, we have stopped capital punishment. We have stopped corporal punishment, and that goes against many fundamental principles." And then another person says, "But the Bible says that we must train up the children the way they should go." And I have this philosophy that we need to train the trainers before the trainers train the children, because so many of our adults and parents don't know nothing about parenting. So what are we bringing? Do we just want to sit and speak to CARICOM? Or do we want to present change to the region? Change that comes from the heart of who we are, that will bring solutions to the whole. That we can work together, we can sit together, that we can teach the world that Christians and Muslims and Hindus and everything else, and Rastafarians and everybody can sit together, because we are faced with a common problem. Yes, sir. And because we are faced with a common problem, we must find common solutions. And this is a good time for us to do that. So my suggestions is that we form ourselves into councils in our nations that will bring solutions to sectors of the society. So when there is a health problem, the faith-based organization must have a health solution. And when there's an economic problem, the faith-based organization must have an economic solution, not a complaining solution. And when there's an education crisis as we face, what's our solution? What are we bringing to the table? What are we saying to them? If you do it this way, it will be better. This is our solution. This is how we feel you should deal with education in our society. And by the way, when you understand Webster's view of education, Webster says that education incorporates all that is intended to enlighten the understanding, to correct the temper, to form the manners and habit of youth, and to fit them for usefulness in their future stations. Now, if you think about Webster's analogy and explanation of education, we have failed miserably across the region. But what is the faith-based organization doing to ensure that this happens? We need to form ourselves not only into our own country's council for education, but we must have a regional council for education, so that the church or the faith-based organization can now begin to sit with those who write our curriculums and all these things in the region and begin to say, this is the approach we should be taken. Are we really educating people? Or are we taking them through a process of programs to sit an exam and they don't know what they set out? So let us come up with solutions. And then we'll be an integral part in the change that affects the society. Why can't we have a faith-based council for crime? You know where the arguments will start, whether you hang them or not. This is serious business. And we're going to have to find solutions. Because then we will always be part of the problem and never be respected as being part of the solutions. I want to encourage all of us. Let's put our differences aside. Let's begin to think about our nations. Let's begin to think about the region. And let us pull together and come up with solutions so that we can save this region that we call CARICOM, or the West Indies, or Caribbean islands. Thank you very much.
We're realizing that there's a need to transcend that concept and that thinking with regards to the church or the faith-based organization being separated from government. And I heard the major making a bold statement concerning Antigua with regards to 98% of the person goes to some church or some faith-based organization. And so we need to revisit this. Well, I heard this discussion by the end of before lunch, which was very important because we were asking the question about the involvement of the faith-based organization in the decision-making process. And I think that is important because there's a need for reformation. What I've found out is that as we discussed, we realize that though we have in our own groupings, though it is Caribbean groupings, national groupings, that we have dealt with some issues and tackled some challenging situations with regards to education, with regards to some poverty. But as a community of Caribbean faith-based organization, we have not dealt with some of those. So I'm looking at this and I'm proposing that we need to look at the concept of transformation and reformation. That we got to transform and we got to reform if we're going to be able to move. Now, the very first one that comes to your mind is ecumenism. You're not talking about ecumenism, so don't get too nervous. We are talking about, looking at the concept of transforming the concept and the mind. And we heard there's a lot coming through the discussion, the mindset of people, how we got to change our mindset and how we see things, and so that we can be able to actually address the issues within CARICOM. I heard the minister a while ago making the point very strongly that we had to wait for CARICOM to call us, but thank God they did. Bless the Lord. then thank God for the effort. Now, as we go forward, realize there are some things that are very necessary, which is fundamental to all faith-based groups, all faith-based organizations, which regards to faith, mercy, and justice. And as we do, all what we have been doing here is looking at these three basic terms: faith, mercy, and justice. Faith talks about godliness, which deals with the whole structure of living right, morality, values, which deals with the whole concept of respect for your fellow man. Mercy, which brings us to the line of charity, dealing with poverty, dealing with the whole things of helping humanity. And justice, which is fairness and impartiality. And what I see coming out of the discussion, that we want to be in the faith-based organization, wants to find themselves right in the center of that discussion in governments, center of that discussion in policy decision making, that we should not be left out of that arena, but we should be in that area as faith-based organization, dealing with regards to godliness, charity, and fairness. Coming out of this, we realize quite a few things have developed, that realize crime is a major issue that is affecting us within, and even out of some of the discussions, some solutions have already begun coming out of it, how to deal with some area of crime. And just the last speaker was making the point that we might have problems in dealing, should we hang them or not, where capital punishment becomes an issue, a discussion. But I think in dealing with this, even looking at recidivism, which is a plague in our society, from our juvenile correction facilities to our prisons. How do we deal with some of those issues to prevent the young ones or those who are doing the crime, even from the early stage, to go back to a system and then plague our society? So these are some things that we must deal with from that level. Let's see how we work on some of those areas and create what I call reform programs of rehabilitation. But let's not just do it on our own, for our own little group, but let's see from a CARICOM level how we can bring this together so that we can establish something that can help. We need, even as we deal with this from CARICOM, we need to deal with what I call some behaviors which disguise under the freedom of religion and freedom of speech, which deals with lawlessness. So we need to speak to issues. And we need to be bold, because some issues we don't want to talk about, but we need to deal with it. If it is affecting the sanctity of life, the sacredness of life, we need to talk about it. We need to be able to guide. And I see us developing reform programs with our thinking to develop some levels of modalities and patterns that can help us set forums in place so that we can actually guide. So I see our discussion here